be today and tomorrow. It's intended to be a brief look at what can you do using oil and gas knowledge, dashboards, SQL, and Python. How can you put everything together to create a cost-effective and overall effective solutions for your workplace problems or your petrotechnical problems. So I am Nashat Omar. I have more than 9 years experience in oil and gas industry. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start this webinar. So basically, how the course is going to be structured is 25% of the time it's going to be allocated to learning basics of the Python. 50% of the time it's going to be allocated to learning the database management, how you can create databases, how you can manage or update, maintain existing databases, and extra 25% is going to be Python as well. However, the extra 25% Python is going to be how to work with dashboards and how to create effective visualizations using Python and SQL Management Studio. So let's go ahead and start talking about databases. The concept of database can be a bit scary, especially for people who have not dealt with databases before. But let me tell you, once you get to know databases, actually it's very easy and the concept is very intuitive and it's very user-friendly. So assume that we have this lot of pieces of Lego on the right-hand side. So let me just bring up the pointer. So assume that we have those pieces of Legos. Everyone knows what a Lego is. And these pieces of Lego, actually, they have this characteristics. It can come in different shapes and sizes. It can have different colors. Actually, they can have a lot of different properties. So you can think of those Legos as your data. So in oil and gas industry, our data sometimes is not well organized. Sometimes it's structured, sometimes it's daily, sometimes it's monthly, depending on the person who's writing the data and depending on the type of the data is being captured. So that's bringing us a bit of challenges to manage those type of data. And actually, if you take those Legos, which is like your data, and put them in a bucket, like this bucket, and now you have converted your data into something called a database. So think of the database as a container or a bucket for your data. So once you put those Legos inside this container, now this container is looking something similar to an Excel sheet or some comma separated value CSV files. These two type of data formats are very common in oil and gas industry or the corporates who are working in the oil and gas fields. However, they are not the best in maintaining and holding on to those data. We will later on, we will know why. And just for now, just think of the problem that the bucket is imposing. So if you take a look at the bucket, you will see different shapes and different sizes of Lego. So admittedly, they are all Lego. However, they have different shapes and size and different characteristics, and they are all mixed together. That will put a very challenge for us. So if we want to get like a square shaped Lego, we need to just maybe flip the bucket around and get and search for that piece of Lego, which would meaning the data. And yeah, it's going to be very time consuming. Now, I want you to think of an Excel sheet that you work with. We all know that most of the companies in oil and gas industry, they use Excel sheets to manage their daily or monthly data. And actually, quite frankly, those Excel sheets get messy around, or they get very crowded and filled with data. Usually, they are not well organized data. So just think of that Excel sheet if you have in the company you work at or the corporate you work at, and you can just imagine the time you will spend on that Excel sheet to manage it. So actually, a better way into managing this type of data is just to organize your data in like different shapes and different colors. meaning that we need to organize our logos into like different smaller containers. So it's going to be a much more manageable and easier to work with. So this is basically the concept of a database. So if we take a look at a database is actually is a container that's going to be used to store data, and that data is going to be in many shapes, meaning many formats. It can be, the data can be integer, can be floats, can be strings. By the way, floats is just a technical way talking about real numbers, and strings is just another technical meaning of like working with text. And booleans are just yes or no, or true or false, and etc. So all of all types of these data can be existing, or they can coexist in a single database. Actually, database is not very useful if we do not create, or it does not have any tables in it, because actual data saving or actual data manipulation is going to be happening in the table. Okay, so if we take a look at number one, actually the database is going to contain multiple tables. And in each and every table, there will be multiple rows. By the way, each table in oil and gas industry usually represents a specific object or a specific data category. For example, we might have a table that's dedicated for injection values, for example, monthly or daily injection. We might have another table that's dedicated specifically for production. We might have another table that's dedicated for the pressure data. So actually, the number of the categories you have depends on the requirements you want to capture, or the data you want to capture in the oil and gas field. But there is a very important catch you need to realize, is those tables are not just regular tables like Excel sheet. Those tables, they are linked together. For example, let's just go ahead and number those tables. For example, table 1, table 2, and table 3. Actually, most of the time, those 3 tables, in real life, it's going to be much more than that. But for the simplicity, let's assume that we have 3 tables. Those 3 tables actually can talk to each other. They can can be linked together once you are managing it or retrieving data. That's the unique properties of the database, because it has a relation. Those tables have a relationship between them. So let me just give you an example of a really bad database. Now in front of you should be a Excel sheet that's visible to you. Please just write in the comments if the Excel sheet is visible. Okay, so this Excel sheet is actually from Volve dataset. Volve is actually is an oil field that's located in North Sea. The data became public, I think, in 2016 or 2017 as a part of supporting educational purposes on those databases, those data sets. Sorry, if you take a look at this Excel sheet, it's holding a lot of columns, and there's two like worksheets or 2 actual sheets on this data, on this Excel. The first one is working with the daily production, and the second one is working with monthly production. Let's go back to the daily production, because the problem actually, it exists on this daily production sheet. If we take a look, we have a lot of columns that contains like repetitive data, and the category of this data is known as static data, meaning that they are not going to change daily. They are static. For example, once you create a well, once you drill a well, you assign a name to it and a API number, and that's it. The name is rarely going to change. So you don't need to just go over again and just type those names in front of each row. Plus, there is another thing. If you scroll to the right, you will see actually there are just like a lot of categories of data sitting on the same Excel sheet. For example, the hours, production hours, the downhole pressure, downhole temperature, the choke size, wellhead attributes, and actual production volumes and injection volumes. And the flow kind, which is the type of the production, is it like production or injection? So the main idea is you cannot just have all of those data in a single sheet, because if you take a look at the last two columns, which is the flow kind and the well type. Well type is something like similar to flow kind. However, it's saying that this is a injector well or water injector, and this is a oil producer well. Those two columns should go on like a table of their own, because those are like static information about the well. And the columns that contain the oil production, like the oil daily production, which is the oil, gas, and water, they should go on a separate table. So now you get the idea. And other parameters that's related to the wellhead pressure, they should go on like a separate table of their own. So actually what the people who were maintaining this Excel sheet, what they did is they just put all the data in a single sheet for ease of access. However, once you are going to maintain the data, it's going to, first of all, the Excel sheet is going to be bloated and it's going to be hard to work with. So databases is created to eliminate these type of issues or this type of misusing database software or data manipulation softwares like Excel sheet. So this is just a bad example of how to put everything together in Excel sheet. And definitely databases will force you to resolve this issue so you can have a better organized data. So let's start talking about database technology. Database is not a new thing. The very first concept of database appeared in 1970. And from there, and it took off. And if each and every company tried to create his own database or his own data solutions. And and so so a lot of companies they have like a brand databases, or they ship flagship databases. For example, you have Microsoft. They are offering something called SQL Server. By the way, this is the name of the product. It's called SQL Server. And you have MySQL. You have another database type called SQLite. You have PostgreSQL. So those are actually, they are just names for same technology, and they are being offered by different companies. So those are the database technology. By the way, you can find like 10 more databases that's not mentioned in here, because they are just too many databases to cover. So why a person or an engineer or a specialist should learn databases? Actually, now most of the industries are just moving forward to digitization, and the knowledge of interacting with data and databases is becoming more and more important each and every day. So actually, engineers and scientists will learn how to interact with the data, how to pull the latest data without relying on like a third party or another person for you to provide the data. So knowing the database is very important, and it's very crucial to be updated with the latest data coming from the field. Plus, working with data actually alleviates the need to work with external files like Excel sheet or text files in order to pull data. If you know how to connect to data, how to manage your data, actually you will just pull data live from the database. So that's the beauty of it. So if we enumerate all the like all the benefits, and they are a lot. So a person or an engineer or specialist will get all his necessary data without any latency. He will just pull all the data he wants. By the way, he can update the data as well. For example, if he takes if he looks at the data and he spots something wrong with a specific data or like a misvalue, so he can update it on the spot as well. So he can do that. So plus he can do his own calculations on the database as well, because usually databases are stored on something called servers, and those servers actually they have much better computational powers than our computers, so they are just better at doing calculations. Plus the database knowledge. Once you learn database, by the way, once you learn database, it's a single time thing. You learn that and you can multiply it in multiple industries. For example, now if you are working in oil and gas industry and you learned how to work with database, the same knowledge you can transfer with you if you go ahead to work with the petrochemical industry, or you go work with food and beverage industry. It's the same knowledge, the same concept, and most of the time it's the same tools. So the knowledge is transferable to all over the industries all over the world. And learning databases actually is very essential for you to production management. Plus once you are getting all those updated data, you can create your own workflows, and those workflows are going to be updated. One of the best utilizations of databases is with digital oil fields. So you can get involved in that as well if you know how to use databases as well. So um, now we know what a database is and what the database is consists of, which is tables and rows. If we take a look at the method of interacting with the database, in 1974, meaning that 48 years ago, two persons, Donald Chamberlain and Raymond Boyce, they invented this language, or this semi-programming language that's used to design, maintain, and manage the databases. By doing so, by creating this language, they standardized and simplified the procedure to access and maintain databases. So what these two people did, actually, they created something called SQL. SQL is short for Structured Query Language, which is a language that's dedicated to interacting with databases. So when you hear the term SQL, actually SQL is the way or the mean that you use to access databases. Databases is, by the way, by itself, a database is just a container of data. It does not provide you any properties or any ways to access the data. You need something called SQL. SQL actually will allow you or empower you to interact with the databases. And by the way, you can do like almost everything you can imagine with SQL. You can get data, you can push data, you can update, delete, create tables, create new databases, and just change the names. You can do a lot of things with it. And as we said, database SQL actually provides all the essential tools, or the essential things that you need to in order to update, delete, view, and create new records. So this is known as the SQL. So the most important things to get out from this slide: database is just a container that contains data. It does not provide you with any way to interact with data. At that place, the SQL's importance arises because SQL is just a programming language that's used to interact with these databases. So the database actually is a multiple piece software. You have the database, you have the SQL language, you have the tables, you have the rows. So everything is separate. And one very nice thing about SQL, or by the way, SQL is pronounced as SQL. One of the important things about SQL is actually SQLs are a very old language from like 50 years ago. And this language fairly stayed the same with like minor revisions here and there. However, like 95% of the language is the same from the day it's incepted. So once you learn SQL, that's it. You don't need to learn it again. So let's talk about one of the best or one of the most common solutions that's being used out there, especially in oil and gas companies. The solution is called Microsoft SQL Server. Microsoft SQL Server is actually is a product offered by Microsoft. It's used to manage databases. It provides you with all the essential tools you need to create and manage your data. It comes actually with two important things. It comes with something called SQL Management Studio. This is a graphical user interface, by the way, a graphical user interface that's used to manage your data. Plus, it supports SQL. So that's a very good thing. And you can just create as much as databases you like with the software. And there are two versions of the software, by the way. The first version is known as Express. So the Express version actually is the free version from Microsoft. So once this webinar or this session ends, you can go ahead and download this free version. I think 2019 is the latest version of SQL. It's every 3 years they have a release. And by the way, the only downfall of this free version is actually they only give you like 10 gigabytes of database storage, and that's it. Once you get those 10 gigabytes filled, you need to upgrade to the enterprise version, which is a paid version of the Express with almost the same functionality. For oil and gas companies that are not capturing data on like on minute or second basis, they actually think they can get use of this 10 gigabytes, like it's going to be filled in 5 years or something like this. So it's going to last a quite bit before you upgrade to the enterprise. So this is the Microsoft SQL Server. So if we go um, to our browser and just search for Microsoft SQL Server. So go ahead and browse the first item or the first element of the search query. And you can find like try database and server, and etc., etc. And you can go ahead and download the Express version. Now 2022 have been rolled out. So every 3 years we're getting a release. By the way, this is 100% free to use unless you do not surpass those 10 gigabytes limits. So you can go ahead and download it, by the way. And this is the Microsoft server, and you install it and you can create all the database you want. So a couple more slides left to go. We will finish up those slides and we'll go ahead and start working with the Microsoft SQL Server. So actually the database, this information we've already take a look at. The database is actually the most important thing is composed of tables. So the database is composed of tables, and each table actually contain two things. The first thing is the columns. Each table can contain multiple columns. For example, the table that's showing in the slide is actually table known as XY table. The XY table is in oil and gas industry is the table that contains all the static information about your wells and like field information, as etc. etc. So the yellow line is the columns. You can have multiple columns. Maybe you can have 100 columns. So the sky is your limit. And each and every entry below the name of the column, those are known as rows or the actual data you are storing. And we have one final thing, which is the index. The index is actually is the numbers of the numbers of the rows you have. For example, this is a zero-based index, meaning that your index is starting from zero. But in SQLs, the index starts from one. Both are the same thing. So the most important thing to know is you have column, number one. Number two, you have rows, which is the actual data. And number three, you have the index. That's it. So SQL is actually is a short for structured query language. It lets you to access and manipulate data. Actually, it's become standardized in 1986 in through ANSI and ISO standardization. So what can we do with SQL? If we learn SQL and how to interact with database, what can we do? Actually, you can execute something called query. Query is actually is the commands you write to interact with data. This is known as a query. So basically, query is a sets of command. You can retrieve or you can get data. You can add data, or the more technical term is insert data. You can update existing data. You can delete. You can create databases, tables, and a lot of things actually. So in databases, we have four basic operations. We have the create operation. We have the create operation. We have the read operation. We have the update and the delete. All of those four terms combined together is known as CRUD operation, CRUD. So the create actually is meaning that you can create new items that it did not exist in the database before. For example, you can create new tables, you can create new rows, you can create new databases. So all of those operations known as create. Read operations is actually is any operations that, or sorry, it's any operation that's related to retrieving or reading data from database. For example, the most common thing is actually retrieving all the data that's existing in a single table or multiple tables at once. Updating data is actually is when you are, for example, willing to change a specific value in a specific cell. So imagine that we have a table like so, and if you want to change like this value, assume that this table is a sitting in Excel sheet. In Excel sheet, what are you going to do is you double click on the cell and then type the value you want. Unfortunately, in databases, it does not work that way. You have to write your commands to do that because updating things in SQL or database environments is a very strict thing. So you have to know what you're doing. And luckily, it's not that hard to learn. And deleting action is any action that will eliminate any item inside a database. And the delete action can be applied on rows, columns, tables, and actually even databases can be deleted. So let's go ahead and open up our SQL. So in order to run the SQL, Microsoft provides a program or a software called SQL Server Management Studio. This is actually installed once you install the SQL Express Edition. Let's go ahead and talk about this software a little bit. So you will be welcomed with this screen. This screen actually tells you what's the name of the server you're working with. So what a server is actually is the name of the installation. For example, the name of my installation is called my server. This can be any name you want. By default, it's SQL Express, but you can change it. You don't need to provide anything. Just click connect. And that's it. Now you're connected to Microsoft SQL database. In order to browse your databases, you go to this folder called databases. You just expand it. Now you will get all the databases you have. So the most important thing to note here is that your computer can have a server, and inside that server can have multiple databases. So once you install the Microsoft SQL Express Edition, you will have the benefits of installing multiple databases on the same PC. So let's go ahead and try to do a few stuffs in this database. So in order to write commands, you click this. It says new query. Query that means we will be working with the database called OilDB2. So if you expand that, actually there are subfolders in that database as well. And the most important folder actually we will going to look at is the tables. If you expand, you will find this database have like 10 tables or something more than that in it. You can just add like as many tables as you want. Some of the tables, by the way, can be captured directly from the fields. Other tables can be calculated tables based on the entries from other tables. So you can have a lot of solutions. Before doing anything, you have to set your working database to OilDB or any database, as a matter of fact, you want to work with. So now the most important thing. So let's go ahead and try to view all the data that's sitting in this table, which is XY. By the way, when you're typing the table name, you don't need to specify this DBO. DBO meaning that this is database object. So you will just directly write its name. So this table name is actually SXY. However, it's preceded with DBO. DBO it can be omitted and it can be written. So it's totally up to you. So if you want to like view all the data in the XY, you need to write a select command. A select actually it's written like this. It's written like this, select. A select command actually means that you want to select all the like all the data you need from this specific table. So let's go ahead and type star. Select all mean that star means in SQL actually means all the columns. From when you type from meaning that you are setting the name of the table and the name table is XY. So that's it. If we break up this command, it's actually is almost comprised of two main pieces. The first piece, which is select star, I am targeting the names of the columns or the number of the columns I want to view. So the star means all the columns. And from XY, this one actually targets the table itself. So now we have two pieces, the select star targeting the names of the columns, star meaning that everything. And from XY, this is targeting or setting the name of the table itself. So let's go ahead and click execute. By the way, you have this nifty button called execute. You can just print F5 on your keyboard as well. And there we go. Now you have all those data in our database. We have just retrieve. Now you can do a lot of things with this. And for example, one of the things you can do is retrieve a single row only. So for example, if you want to, let's say, retrieve the row that contains this value only, let's go ahead and copy this. You right click and copy it. So before we do any filtering or doing anything, the first column, it's called UID, which is meaning the unique identifier. The unique identifier is the well name. And so in order to retrieve only a single well, you will do something called where. Actually, where is actually a statement that does filtering. So I want to filter on unique ID. I will type the well name and then the unique ID equals to, I will paste the well name. From the looks of it, this is a wrong thing to do. Let me just tell you why. I will run this and you will get an error because the name actually need to be enclosed in quotations because the name does not represent any object in your database. That's why it's giving you an error. So whenever you are trying to filter values, you have to enclose them into single quotations. So let's go ahead and click execute. And there you go. Now you have only a single value have returned from the database itself. So let's try another statement. So in this statement, so let me just do select again, select all from XY. By the way, you can type multiple commands on the same SQL software or on same SQL script. You only need to highlight it and then click execute. The highlighted portion will be only run. So now everything is run again. If you take a look, actually, you have a lot of data that's null. Null meaning that the data is not existing. So you don't have data. Null actually is not zero. Null is meaning that it's missing. Data is missing. So let's go ahead and create a filter that where the alias column is not null, meaning that it does not contain any null. This is actually fairly simple to do. What you need to do is once the things related to filtering, you need to use where. So where actually is suppose the name of the columns comes after where. For example, I want to work with alias column. Now, where alias, what I want to do with alias is only retrieve the rows that are not null. So you write something like is not null, meaning that everything will be returned except those rows that contains nulls in the alias column. So this where command actually works on a single column. There is like multiple ways you can chain multiple columns together, but that's a bit complicated for today's session. So you will click execute. Now, only the rows that's where the alias is not null are returned. So if you take a look, alias actually does not contain anything that's null. And that's basically it. So let's go ahead and do like another comparison or do another filtering. I will just copy this select statement and I will add it as a third query. So let's do another thing. Now let's filter our wells based on their locations. So what I am talking about is we have the X and the Y coordinates. If you want to like filter out your well depending on the X coordinates, you can do that as well. For example, let's filter out any well that's the X coordinates that's greater than this number. So first of all, let me just copy this number and I will write a where statement where X coord, which is the name of the column, is greater than this value. By the way, when you're working with numerics, you don't need to use quotations. Quotations are only used when you have like letters and numbers combined together or letters only. Only then you need to use quotations, but for numerics, you don't need to use it. So highlight everything, click run, and there you go. Now it returned all the wells that its X coordinate that greater than this value that's provided in here. So let's go ahead and change this value to 46 so we can just narrow our search a little bit. If we take a look at this search query or the search result, you will find the just take a look at right hand side, the bottom. You have something in here, which is the last element, which is 148 rows, meaning that the query that we have just run, by the way, all of these sets of commands known as query, the queries we run actually returned 148 rows only. So let's rerun this after we change the number and click execute. Now we are getting 83 rows only. By the way, using SQL only is not very beneficial. You have to combine this with any programming language. Actually, the programming language of choice is going to be Python. So tomorrow, actually, we will combine SQL with Python so we can just save all those data. By the way, the data you get from SQL, this is on the memory only, meaning that Once you close the software, all those data is going, all of those data results is going to be demolished or going to be deleted from the memory. But if you use Python, you can do a lot of things with it. So before we conclude our session, let me just go ahead and do another thing. For example, if you want to get the wells or you get the list of the wells where the depth, we have a column called T depth, meaning that this is the total depth. Uh, for example, let's get all the wells that have a total depth greater than 3,300. So that's very easy to do. So you will use select all from XY, and then we will apply a where. Once you apply where, meaning that you're trying to filter out the results. So the column name we're applying this filter on is T depth, that's it. Now the T depth should be greater than 3,300. By the way, this value can be any value you like, any value of interest to you. So let's select these statements and click execute. Now we get 48 rows. Only those wells are deeper than 3,300. If you want to like go deeper, maybe you can just put it like 3,400 and click run. Now we are getting only 19 rows. By the way, once you use Python, you can utilize all of these data in order to like create calculations and etc. etc. So the last thing we will do before we conclude our session is we are going to take a look at a table called PRD. So this PRD table actually contains all the production data that's sitting on this database. So if you take a close look at each category of data is stored in its own table. That's the correct way to go and do that. So let's go ahead and retrieve the PRD data. So select all from PRD. Let's highlight this and click run. And there we go. If you take a look at, there is only a single column that's common between those two tables, which is the unique ID. And actually that's the key for you to work, because you're going to link all the columns together using the unique ID. By the way, you can just highlight two statements or two queries together and execute. Actually, you will get two different result tables. If you want to link the results on a single table, you have to do that explicitly. We are not going to cover that in this session. If you take a look, the first table is the XY table, and the second table is the production table. Just pay a close attention to these two tables, and they are 100% different from each other. The type of the data each table holds is just on another category. For example, the first table only contains those static data that does not change. However, the second table, which contains the production data, contains like a single well with like multiple records and multiple oil and gas and water production parameters. So thank you so much for being good listeners.